Our town, Blackwood Falls, has a dark secret. Every time a child is born, it is always twins. But there is a price to pay when they turn 18. The mother must choose one child to die so the other can live a full life. My sister and I are identical twins, so similar that even our parents mix us up. Tomorrow is the weekend, and our family is going for a picnic by the river. The night before we left, I overheard my mother whispering in the kitchen. "We have to kill Layla," she said. My father let out a long, heavy sigh and finally grunted in agreement. A cold shiver ran from my toes to the top of my head as I stood there frozen. My own mother wanted me dead. I couldn't believe it, but the truth was staring me in the face. Why did she choose to sacrifice me? I've spent years studying hard, being the perfect, obedient daughter. I'm better than my sister in every single way. If this was about survival of the fittest, my plain, average sister Tinsley should be the one to go. I was filled with a mix of burning hatred and paralyzing fear. The next morning, I did my best to act like nothing was wrong. Before we set off, I turned to my sister with a playful grin. "Hey, want to play a game?" Tinsley looked at me, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What kind of game?" she asked. I gave her a mischievous smirk. "Let's swap identities for the day. You pretend to be Layla, and I'll be Tinsley. Let's see how long it takes for Mom and Dad to notice." She agreed immediately, thrilled by the idea. My trap was set. During the picnic, we wandered near the water. Mom stood by the riverbank and suddenly called out my name. "Layla." I felt a jolt of panic shoot through my body. Tinsley was already deep in her role and remembered our game. She answered naturally and ran over to Mom with a smile. I watched her go, knowing she was walking toward her grave. Then it happened. Splash. Without a single moment of hesitation, Mom pushed her into the freezing river. Tinsley thrashed in the water, her eyes wide with terror as she tried to claw her way back to the bank. But Mom held her head down, pressing with all her strength. She didn't let go until the struggling stopped and the water went still. Only then did Mom stand up, breathing a sigh of relief. My father and I watched the whole thing from the shore. I was horrified by my father's silence and my mother's cruelty. But mostly, I was relieved that Tinsley had died in my place. After that day, I became Tinsley. Mom called the police and told them Layla had slipped and fallen into the river. When the detectives questioned me, I told them the exact same story. At the funeral, the guests were draped in black and drowning in tears. Only Mom and I stood in the corner, hiding our twisted smiles. Once the guests left, Mom didn't shed another tear. That night, she cooked a massive feast, looking happier than I'd ever seen her. She piled food onto my plate and served me soup. She kept smiling at me, reaching over to wipe a bit of grease from the corner of my mouth. I felt a strange sense of bliss. I was so glad I was the one who survived. Sometimes, I wondered what her face would look like if she found out she killed the wrong daughter. The thought made me giddy. Late that night, I couldn't sleep from the excitement. I sat cross-legged on my bed, reading a textbook on aerospace engineering. My dream was to get into a top-tier flight academy. I was so absorbed in my reading that I didn't hear my father enter the room. When I looked up and saw him, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I quickly shoved the textbook under my pillow and forced a nervous laugh. I grabbed a trashy romance novel, The CEO's Obsession, from the nightstand instead. To avoid suspicion, I mimicked Tinsley's ditzy giggle. Ugh, why would Layla like those boring science books? They're so lame. Despite my best acting, my father just stared at me with a hollow look in his eyes. My heart skipped a beat. Tinsley hated school and couldn't care less about astronomy or engineering. She spent all her time reading mindless stories about billionaires falling for high school dropouts. She was a fool who believed in fairy tales with a 1 in a billion chance of happening. And yet, Mom had chosen her over me. The look in Dad's eyes told me he knew exactly what I had done. I wanted to beg him for mercy, but he didn't say a word. He simply turned around and walked out of my room. I stayed awake all night, terrified he would tell Mom the truth. The next morning, I crept out of my room trembling. Mom was in the kitchen, humming a tune while she made a hot breakfast. Dad was sitting at the table with his head down, eating as if nothing had happened. Mom looked up and beamed at me. "Morning, Tinsley. Wash your hands and come eat, sweetie." I glanced at my father, stunned. He hadn't told her my secret. Why was he keeping it from me? I was confused, and although I felt a wave of relief, I felt like a ticking time bomb. After breakfast, Dad drove me to school. He remained silent the whole way, making no attempt to expose me. Finally, as I got out of the car, he spoke. "Be careful." Be careful? Be careful of what? Crossing the street? Or being caught? Was that a warning, or did he actually care about me? I spent the whole day on edge, unable to focus on my classes. When I got home, I looked at Mom with a sense of dread. She gave me a warm look and asked, "What's wrong, baby? Did something bad happen today? Did you fail another test? It's okay if you did." I was holding a paper with a perfect score in my hand, but I hid it behind my back. I looked toward my father's room, feeling like a criminal. Mom noticed my strange behavior and followed my gaze to Dad. The next second, She pulled me outside and put a finger to her lips. "Sho, I figured it out a long time ago. That man isn't your father." My mind went completely blank as I stared at her in total confusion. "What do you mean? Dad is Dad. How can he not be my father?" I couldn't wrap my head around her words. Mom gripped my shoulders firmly. "Wait for me out here. Whatever you do, do not go inside." Before I could ask anything else, Mom slipped back inside and locked the door. The fear inside me grew until I could hardly breathe. I stood there, staring at the closed door. The house was deathly quiet. Eventually, I worked up the courage to peek inside. I checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bedrooms, but they were empty. My gut told me someone was in the bathroom. When I pushed the bathroom door open, I saw Mom. She was using a thick rope to strangle Dad. He was struggling weakly, his eyes bulging as he reached out a hand toward me. It was his final plea for help. But I stood there and did nothing, just as he had done nothing when Mom drowned my sister. My first thought was that if he died, my secret died with him. I wouldn't have to live in fear anymore. Once he was dead, I asked Mom why she did it. She told me she had known for 4 years that he wasn't my father. He was actually my father's twin brother, Silas. I was shocked. Wasn't Uncle Silas supposed to have died when he turned 18? That's when Mom revealed a massive secret to me. Mom and Dad were both born in Blackwood Falls. Naturally, they both had identical twins. That is the curse of our town. Mom was the one chosen to live, while her sister was sacrificed at 18. Mom and Dad were childhood sweethearts, their marriage arranged by their families. My father was a simple, quiet man who didn't say much. His brother, Silas, was charming, funny, and talented. But Silas was the one marked for death. He was supposed to have no future. Mom married my father as planned. She thought her life would be peaceful and predictable. Until 4 years ago. Mom's face twisted with anger as she remembered. I was cleaning the windows on the 16th floor balcony when I slipped. I almost fell to my death, but he caught my wrist with lightning-fast reflexes. I knew right then. My husband was never that fast or that observant. The man standing there wasn't him. Something went wrong years ago. Silas had taken my father's place and lived his life. I couldn't believe my family was built on such a massive lie. I asked Mom, my voice shaking. "If you knew, why kill him now?" After all, he had played the role perfectly for years and only exposed himself to save her life. Mom's expression turned cold and dark. He was the second-born. He was supposed to die. He has no right to be in this world. Her coldness terrified me. I started to tremble uncontrollably. If Mom ever found out my secret, would I end up like Silas? Mom thought I was just shaken by the sight of the body. She shifted from a cold killer to a loving mother in an instant. She stroked my hair gently and said, "Don't be scared. Everything will be fine now." I nodded stiffly. Mom looked at Silas's body with a sense of relief, and as I turned away, I let out a hidden smile of my own. After he was gone, it was just the two of us. Nobody else bothered us anymore. To the neighbors, we were just a poor mother and daughter who had suffered too many tragedies. People were kind to us, offering help whenever they could. Days turned into weeks. One afternoon, I was cleaning Dad's room when I found a hidden letter in the desk. I opened it and found only 2 words written in red ink. "Be careful." The words hit me like a physical blow. I remembered him saying those exact words to me before. What was he trying to tell me? To be careful of Mom? I felt a sudden chill. Then, I felt a pair of eyes watching me through the crack in the door. "Mom." I panicked and tried to hide the letter before she could see it. She was standing perfectly still in the shadows, her eyes boring into mine. Slowly, the door creaked open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I watched her hands, waiting for a weapon to appear. She wasn't holding a knife though. She was holding my heavy aerospace engineering textbook. She looked at me with a terrifying, accusing glare. I broke into a cold sweat. I had hidden that book under my mattress. How did she find it? I was finished. Mom's voice was like ice. "Why are you reading this? You told me you hated science." I stammered, trying to find an excuse. I just used it to level my bed frame. The floor is uneven." Mom's gaze remained sharp, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Suddenly, the phone in her pocket started ringing loudly. She gave me one last look and stepped away to answer it. I slumped against the wall, tears of terror streaming down my face. When she finished her call, I wiped my eyes and tried to act normal. Mom looked at me, her expression now filled with genuine grief. "Your grandmother is dying. I have to go back to the village to say goodbye." The news shocked me, but it also felt like a stay of execution. "I'm coming with you," I blurted out. I didn't actually care about my grandmother. We moved to the city when I was tiny. I had no connection to her, or that creepy village. But I was dying to see Blackwood Falls for myself. I wanted to know why everyone was a twin, and why one had to die. But Mom refused to let me go. She didn't want me near that nightmare of a town. She said we had worked too hard to escape the curse. Mom packed a small bag and left for the village immediately. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe. While she was gone, the guy next door, Caleb, took care of me. He was sweet, kind, and a total gentleman. He called me Tinsley with so much affection in his voice. He had been in love with my sister, and he had no idea he was talking to Layla. Pretending to be an idiot was exhausting. 7 days later, Mom returned from the village. She looked like she had aged 20 years. Her hair was graying and her eyes were bloodshot. A few days after her return, she took my hand and spoke solemnly. "You're not good at school, Tinsley. You should drop out. Find a nice, honest man to marry. I need to know you're taken care of before I go." I wanted to scream that I wanted to be an engineer, but I was living Tinsley's life now. Maybe this was my punishment for what I did. I couldn't fight her. 2 weeks later, I married Caleb. He was an only child and a city boy, which made Mom very happy. But I felt like I was dying inside. I got pregnant soon after the wedding. But instead of joy, I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I was afraid, though I didn't know exactly what of. The paranoia I had been hiding for years only got worse during the pregnancy. The anxiety never left me. After 9 months, I gave birth. Mom was thrilled. Caleb was over the moon. But I felt nothing but cold dread. I looked down at the 2 identical babies in my arms. The curse had found me, even in the city, even with a man who had no siblings. I fell into a deep depression. Caleb was incredibly supportive, trying his best to comfort me. He and Mom took turns helping with the babies, but I felt like there was a boulder sitting on my heart. The years went by, and the boys turned 8. The older they got, the more anxious I became. Then, Mom got sick and decided to go back to Blackwood Falls. She wanted to die where she was born. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen, she called me for the last time. Her voice was weak, and she told me she was fading fast. Caleb and I packed up the kids and drove toward the village I both feared and craved. The secrets I had buried deep down started to bubble to the surface. We arrived in the middle of the night. Mom was barely hanging on, lying on a wooden board in the middle of her old courtyard. Caleb broke down in tears, but Mom never even opened her eyes to look at me before she took her last breath. The villagers whispered their prayers and slipped away to their homes. The courtyard was pitch black, leaving just me, Caleb, and the boys. According to the local tradition, the son-in-law had to keep a vigil over the body all night. I settled the boys into a bedroom and fell into a restless sleep. I woke up to the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. I heard something moving outside. Thinking of Caleb out there in the cold, I decided to take him a jacket. As I climbed out of bed, a dark shadow flickered past the window. I jumped, but told myself it was just a bird or a bat. I grabbed a coat and stepped out into the yard. The body was still there on the board, resting on 2 tall stools. A piece of wet yellow paper covered her face, making the scene look even more sinister. I looked around, but I couldn't see Caleb anywhere. Maybe he went to the outhouse? There were no lights in the yard, and the darkness felt heavy. I didn't want to get too close to the body, so I walked along the edge of the wall. A sudden chill swept through the yard, making me shiver. "Caleb." I called out softly. My voice echoed in the silence, but there was no answer. Fear began to crawl up my spine. "Caleb." I shouted louder. Still nothing. Where could he have gone at this hour? Suddenly, a black cat leaped onto the wall, its green eyes glowing in the dark. It let out a sharp, piercing cry that set my nerves on edge. Then I heard a scratching sound like a rat gnawing on wood. My gut told me the sound was coming from the middle of the yard. I froze like a rusted machine, slowly turning my head to look. The body was sitting up on the wooden board. The hair on my arms stood up. I was paralyzed with terror. Was she a zombie? As the panic flooded my brain, I finally broke into a sprint back toward the house. But when I got inside, the kids were gone. Liam. I screamed. The front door swung open, and a massive shadow stretched across the floor in the moonlight. I saw my mother, the woman who was supposed to be dead. She was standing there with a twisted, hunched posture. She grinned at me, showing a row of white teeth that looked too sharp. My 2 sons were standing right next to her. Then they simply vanished into the night. "Give them back," I screamed, losing my mind. I chased after them, ready to kill anyone who got in my way. Suddenly, Caleb appeared out of nowhere. He grabbed me from behind with incredible strength. His arms were like iron bands, pinning me down no matter how much I struggled. I shrieked and clawed at him. I watched as Mom led my children further and further away into the darkness. I felt my heart shattering. "Give me my babies," I howled. Caleb seemed to be in on it, holding me back while they took my sons. In a burst of frantic energy, I spun around and punched him as hard as I could. I let out all my rage and grief, hitting him over and over again. Suddenly, a voice broke through the chaos. "Tinsley. Tinsley, wake up." I snapped my eyes open and sat bolt upright in bed. I was drenched in sweat and realized it had all been a dream. Leo and Liam were sleeping peacefully right beside me. I pulled them into my arms, trembling as I hummed a shaky lullaby. Caleb was standing over me, looking worried and a bit strange. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he stayed silent. After he got me settled back down, he turned to head back out to the yard. You don't care about the kids at all, do you? I snapped. He bit his lip and didn't answer, his expression darkening as he walked out. I was so disappointed in him. I wanted to tell him everything, to find the truth about this village together. But he didn't seem to want to listen to me. I tucked the boys in and watched them closely. The moonlight showed Mom's body still lying in the yard. I looked at my sons and knew I could never do what my mother did. I couldn't kill one of them. I had to find the truth about the curse so they could both live. I lay back down. But then I noticed a dark bundle on the floor. A sense of impending doom washed over me. I climbed out of bed to see what it was. The house was old, and the electricity was flickering and weak. I turned on my phone flashlight and saw a black jacket on the floor. My brain felt like it was exploding. That was the jacket I was going to take to Caleb in my dream. Fear surged through me like a tidal wave. Did that mean it wasn't a dream? Was it all real? I scrambled back onto the bed and grabbed Leo. But when I reached for Liam, the bed was empty. Liam. I tore the room apart, checking every corner and closet. Leo woke up crying and followed me, terrified. I looked out the window and saw Caleb. He was holding Liam's hand, leading him out of the yard and into the darkness. The floorboards of the old house did not creak. They groaned under my bare feet. A wet, rotting sound that seemed to rise from the damp earth beneath the foundations. I clutched Leo against my chest. His small body was shivering, his fingers dug so tightly into my flannel nightgown that his nails pinched my skin. In my right hand, the beam of my phone flashlight sliced through the heavy, stagnant darkness of the corridor, illuminating the thick layer of dust on the floorboards. Outside, the mist was so dense it looked like white wool pressed against the window panes. I pushed the heavy oak front door open. The iron latch clicked with a sharp, cold sound that seemed to echo down the empty, dark street of Blackwood Falls. The wooden board in the center of the courtyard was empty. The two tall stools remained standing, but the white-shrouded body of my mother was gone. The wet yellow paper that had covered her face lay in the mud, its ink runoff turning the gray water around it a faint, sickly yellow. Mommy, Leo whispered, his voice cracking against my neck. Where is Liam going? Shoo, I muttered, my eyes locking onto the dark, wet mud of the driveway. There were two sets of footprints leading out of the yard and into the dense pine forest. One set was large, deep, Caleb's heavy leather boots. The other was small, shallow, the steps uneven as if the child were being dragged or led in a hurry. I didn't run. I couldn't. My knees felt stiff, filled with the same cold, heavy stone that had settled in my chest the day I watched my sister drown. I walked slowly, my bare feet hitting the sharp pine needles and the wet, freezing mud of the trail, the light of my phone tracing the dark trunks of the trees. The forest was silent, save for the distant, rhythmic wail of the wind through the high canopy. As we got deeper into the woods, the smell of damp pine began to change. It turned thick, sour, carrying the distinct metallic sting of river silt and wet copper. The scent of the river. Annika. I whispered to myself, the old name my grandmother used to call my mother's sister, the one who had died at 18, crossing my mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, creased piece of paper I had found in Silas's desk. My fingers smoothed the dry paper under the light of my phone. Be careful. He hadn't been warning me about my mother. He had been warning me about Caleb. The clearing near the river was older than the town. It was a circular depression in the earth, lined with massive, gray river stones that had been smoothed by centuries of floods. In the center sat a flat, black, granite slab, the altar where the families of Blackwood Falls had settled there. Ledger for 7 generations. 20 torches were stuck into the wet earth around the circle, their orange flames flickering slowly in the damp wind, casting long, twisting shadows across the stone. Caleb stood by the slab. He was wearing his dark wool coat, his hair wet with rain, his face completely pale under the torchlight. In his right hand he was holding Liam's hand. Liam was silent, his small face vacant, his eyes wide and unblinking as if he had been drugged with the same herb my mother used to put in my tea. And beside the slab stood my mother. She was not wearing her burial shroud. She wore her old, gray woolen cardigan, her long silver hair tied back with a piece of faded red string, her face looking completely healthy, her eyes bright and sharp as she watched me step out from the shadow of the pines. You're late, Layla, she said. Her voice was clear, carrying the flat, level rhythm of a dry courtroom clerk. My hand on Leo's shoulder went completely cold. You, I whispered, my voice barely a breath. You're alive. Of course I'm alive, she said, taking a step toward the altar. The heart attack was a temporary arrangement. We needed to see if the Tinsley who returned to the village was the ditzy girl who loved cheap novels, or the perfect, obedient daughter who knew how to calculate the structural velocity of a wingspan. She reached down, her fingers gently smoothing a stray lock of hair behind Liam's ear. You were always too smart, Layla. When you brought that aerospace book into the house 4 years ago, I knew. Your sister didn't even know how to spell aerospace. You survived the river because you played a game. But the ledger of Blackwood Falls cannot be cheated. Caleb. I turned my eyes to my husband, my voice trembling. You knew. Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at the black stone of the slab, his fingers tightening around Liam's hand. The elders told me 3 years ago, Tinsley, or rather Layla, Caleb said, his voice flat, stripped of all the sweet, gentle warmth he had used to comfort me during my depression. Our family's business in the city was funded by the Sterling Group. My grandfather was one of the original directors who signed the covenant. I was ordered to marry you to keep you under surveillance. If you had stayed quiet, if you had lived as Tinsley, we could have let both boys live until they were 18. He looked up, his eyes yellow-rimmed and cold under the torchlight. But you're too smart. You've been looking into the town's history. You've been asking the librarians about the registry. The covenant says that if a survivor attempts to expose the balance, the sacrifice must be made early. Tonight, the ledger must be balanced. The silence in the clearing was heavy, smelling of wood smoke and the sharp, iron tang of the river silt. The choice is yours, Layla, my mother said, pointing to the two boys. Leo or Liam. One goes into the water tonight, and the other returns to the city with Caleb to live a full, wealthy life. If you don't choose, the guards will take them both. For men in black wool coats, the same neighbors who had offered us food and condolences in the city, stepped out from the shadow of the stones, their hands resting on their heavy leather utility belts. I won't choose, I said, my voice dropping into a register that made the orange flames of the torches seem to flicker. You have no choice, Layla, my mother said, her face turning an ugly gray paper color under the light. Your father, Silas, thought he could cheat the covenant too. He took his brother's place, lived his life, and thought he was safe. But the water always finds the second-born. I had to put the rope around his neck myself to save our family's share of the land. He caught your wrist, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. On the 16th floor balcony. He saved your life. He was a second-born, my mother snapped, her voice losing all its maternal polish, turning thin and sharp. His very existence was a violation of the law. He had to die. I looked at the black granite slab, then at my two sons. Leo was crying, his small body shaking against my leg, but Liam was still standing by Caleb, his eyes vacant and still. The covenant is a business contract, Mom, I said, my hand slowly reaching into the pocket of my coat. My grandfather was a surveyor. He mapped the coal lines under the Western Valley 60 years ago. He realized that if the population of the valley exceeded 300 families, the state would intervene and reclaim the mineral rights under the Heritage Protection Act. My mother froze. The curse is just a population control scheme, I continued, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal of the object in my pocket. You killed your own sister, you killed my father, and you drowned my sister Tinsley, not because of some ancient gods, but because you wanted to keep your share of the coal royalties. Shut up, my mother shrieked, her hand raising to signal the guards. Take them. Take them both. But before the first guard could step onto the stone circle, I pulled my hand from my pocket. It wasn't a weapon. It was a simple silver flares launcher I had taken from my father's old study drawer. I pointed it straight up at the dry canopy of the pine trees above us. Bang! The red flare did not just light up the sky. It turned the entire clearing into a blinding white-hot wall of heat. The dry pine needles on the low branches caught instantly, the fire spreading along the canopy with a loud, crackling shriek that sounded like 1,000 iron sheets tearing at once. The thick white smoke descended into the circle, blinding the guards and turning the orange light of the torches into a chaotic green-gray haze. Lao! Run! I screamed, grabbing his hand and throwing myself toward the altar. In the confusion, I slammed my shoulder into Caleb's chest. The force of my running weight, backed by the raw, wild adrenaline of a mother, sent him flying backward into the stone basin of the riverbank. He let out a sharp, wet cry as his head hit the granite. I grabbed Liam's hand. His fingers were cold, stiff, but his eyes were beginning to blink, the sudden, loud noise of the fire breaking through his drug-induced sleep. Mommy, he whispered. I'm here, baby, I sobbed, pulling both of them against my chest as we ran into the dense, burning undergrowth of the northern forest. Behind us, my mother's voice rose in a high, hysterical wail that carried over the crackle of the flames. The water will find them, Layla. You can't run from the valley. But I didn't look back. I was an aerospace engineer. I knew how to calculate velocity. I knew how to find the path of least resistance through the dark. And I knew that as long as I was breathing, my sons would never have to stand on that black stone slab. We reached the highway at 5 a.m. The morning sun was just beginning to break through the gray mist of the horizon, casting a long, golden path across the wet asphalt. A simple yellow cab, which I had pre-booked using my father's old private account before we left the city, was waiting for us by the milestone marker. I opened the door, pushed the boys into the warm, leather-scented air of the back seat, and sat down beside them. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, looking at my bare, muddy feet and the gray ash on my hair. "The airport," I said, my voice calm, steady, and entirely free of the terror of Blackwood Falls. "We're going to Seattle." The city of Seattle was quiet in the winter. The rain was constant, but it smelled of fresh ocean salt and cedarwood, a clean, cold mist that washed away the last traces of the river silt from my boots. I sat on the wooden deck of my small, gray-shingled cottage near the harbor, a cup of hot chamomile tea in my hand. Beside me on the table lay my new textbook on structural thermodynamics and 2 admission letters for the boys' new school. Leo and Liam were playing on the wet sand below, their red boots splashing through the small puddles, their laughter high, clear, and completely free of the shadows. They looked identical. They were healthy, and they were both alive. My phone, sitting on the wood beside my tea, vibrated once. It was an email from my attorney in the old town. Subject: Blackwood Falls Registry finalized. I clicked the attachment. The state regulatory board had officially seized the Western Valley's mineral rights under the Heritage Protection Act. The coal mines were being shut down, the royalties frozen by court order, and the ancient families of the valley were being cleared out by the state. My mother and Caleb were currently under investigation for corporate fraud and second-degree murder, their names permanently removed from the city's registry. I closed the laptop, put my phone on silent, and took a sip of my warm tea. The wind off the water was cold, but it felt clean against my skin, carrying the last dry leaves of the past away into the endlessly beautiful horizon ahead.